Corruption. What is corruption? According to Transparency International, it is the abuse of enterprise power for private gain. It can be classified as either grand, petty, or political, depending on the amount of loss and the sector where it occurred. What is transparency? Transparency, according to Transparency International, is shedding light on shady deals, weak enforcement of rules, and other elect practices that undermine good government, ethical businesses, and society at large. The cost of corruption corrupts the fabric of society. It undermines people's trust in political and economic system, institutes, and leaders. Basically, the citizens lose trust in the government. It can also cost people their freedom, health, money, and sometimes even their lives. The main issues involved in Transparency International. Transparency International. Firstly, Transparency International is a legal global civil society leading the fight against corruption. Basically, they're an organization that aims to create a corrupt free world. This organization brings people together in a powerful worldwide coalition to end the impact that corruption has had. What do they do? The mission of this organization is to create change and establish a corrupt free world. It also deals with national elections won and lost while tackling corruption. It educates individuals on the dangers of corruption that corruption carries. Basically, it educates the society on what corruption has done and it's doing and it can do to the future. Types of corruption. There are many kinds of corruption, but mainly there are three kinds. The first one is known as petty corruption according to Transparency International. This refers to everyday abuse of entrusted power by low and mind level public by low and mind level public officials in their interaction with ordinary citizens who often are trying to access basic goods or services in places like hospitals, schools, police departments, and other agencies. A perfect example of this would be South Africa. If you are trying to get your passport and there are five stages that you're going through and each require $100 each for each process. According to petty corruption, each official that's sitting down on this place will make you pay an extra $50 or an extra $100 in order to make the passport in order to make gaining the passport faster. If you don't pay these amounts that these officials tell you to pay, you end up getting your passport later than you expected. These transactions are known as back to the envelope transactions or back of the envelope calculations. As you can see in this picture, the second type of corruption is known as grand corruption. Grand corruption is the abuse of high level power that benefits the few at the expense of many and causes serious and widespread harm to individuals and society. It often goes unpunished. Grand corruption is one of the great unsolved legal challenges of our day. The best example of this would be Ukraine. The Ukraine ex-president Viktor and his cronies stand accused of stealing $7.5 billion from the government and were put under protection by Russia and have not been convicted since. The third type of corruption would be political corruption, which is the one that is mostly known. Political corruption is the use of powers by government officials or their networking contacts for illegitimate private gain. An illegal act of any office holder constitutes political corruption only if the act is directly related to the office's official duty, is done under color of law, or involves trading in influence. Examples of grand corruption are bribery, nepotism, and extortion. An example of nepotism, as you can see in the picture, the second picture, you have government officials asking, so what makes you think you're the right person for this post? And the person applying for this post replying, well, I'm highly motivated, outgoing, and independently minded. Isn't that right, Dad? Basically, an example of this type of um, corruption would be Nigeria, where the government has become a family business. The misuse of government power for other purposes, such as repression of political opponents and general police brutality, is also considered political corruption. How does Transparency International gather data? The methodology of Corruption Index is it selects of selection of sources, recalling source data, and collecting recalled data. Step 1. Selection of sources and data. Transparency International gathers data from 13 different resources. Some resources are Freedom House Nations in Transit, World Bank, African Development Bank Government's Rating, World Justice Project Rule of Law Index Expert Survey, WJP. The second and third step are rescaling source data. The 13 resources, at least three resources, standardizing value using calculations to rescale and using the corruption index scaling from 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupted and 100 is clear. Who funds these organizations, which you may usually ask as it is a big organization? Donors of Transparency International exercises donates many risk and reputations of Transparency International. Some of these, as given in the picture that you can see, are Shell, UK Aid, and so on. Policies of donation in Transparency International. It accepts funds from any dollars and whether monetary or kind, provided that its acceptance doesn't impair Transparency International independence to pursue its mission. Also not to endanger its integrity or reputation. This means the reasons why it has a lot of sources, such as 13 donors, is that it doesn't really affect their act. If one donor doesn't donate because they are not getting what they want from Transparency International, that means that the organization won't be affected as much. The Corruption Perspective Index. The Corruption Perspective Index, which ranks 180 countries and territories by their presented levels of public sector corruption, according to experts and business people, it uses a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean. More than two-thirds of countries score below 50 on this year's CPI, with an average score of just 43. Turkey. In Turkey, the CPI score has dropped over the years, and the country has moved up higher in ranking, indicating corruption levels are rising slightly over the years. Moving on from now, I'll be giving you different countries' rankings across the world. Turkey's score has reduced as the years go by and their rankings has increased. The correlation between scores and rankings is the more your score reduces, the higher you go. The higher you go on the ranking scale. The second country we'll be comparing is France. In France, as we can see that the score has not really changed it is pretty much the same, but their ranking is improving, which means that corruption levels are dropping. Mozambique. Mozambique is an African country where corruption is actually high. In Mozambique, the CPI score has decreased, and the ranking of the country has also drastically moved up, which means corruption in this country has gone from bad to worse. The list of clean countries, as you can see in the list below, number one is Denmark. The top five will be Denmark, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, and Norway, with a score of 86, 89, 89, 91, and 91. And the list of highly corrupt countries are Thailand, Tunisia, Zambia, Benin, China, and so on. 69% of the 176 countries on the Corruption Perception Index in 2016 scored below 50. On a scale from 0, perceived to be highly corrupt, 200 perceived to be very clean, exposing